Okay, so today we're going to be talking about benefit cost analysis, and this comes from chapter 9 of your book. And this is a big shift in the course, and I'll explain why in a bit, but this is kind of, the halfway point in the course, and this is where we turn our attention from profitability to other issues as well. So before we start on that, just a reminder that homework 8 is due on Monday before class. And then I hope that you're making some progress on the project. And, on that topic, let me just point out a certain video. Oh, no, that's not the one. Yeah. Okay, so the class from Wednesday of last week had a section on it that I think is,
Just thinking of
oops,
you.
I did the wrong thing. Let me go back. Hi everybody, Dr. Waite here. All right, so this section, I talk about the project, and it's probable that any questions you have about how to do things in the project are addressed by this video. So I really encourage you to take the time, even if you skip the first half of the class, which I'll be sorry to hear if you do that, but if you skip the lecture part of it, definitely it'd be worth your time to go through this video where I start talking about how to do the project. So that video is on YouTube. It's class 19. Okay. All right, so with that said, let's talk about benefit cost analysis. And probably everybody here loves money, right? I love money so much. Sometimes when I'm feeling bad, I just will look in my wallet or I'll pull up my bank balance and it just cheers me up immediately. I love money so much. More than my children, more than my parents, more than my health. Money is the main thing for me. There's other things, but for me it's mostly money. Of course, hopefully you're able to detect sarcasm. I know that some people struggle with that, but I'm joking. There are other things in the world besides money, but so far, we've been looking at every project from the perspective of what we want to do is maximize profit. And, there are organizations where that's their primary responsibility. And for example, the president of a company that is publicly traded, meaning that there are shares on the stock exchange, the president of that company has a responsibility to maximize the profits that are returned to the shareholders. And they really have to be cautious about prioritizing other things besides maximizing the money that they send to their shareholders. And so there are other considerations that some companies are successful at including, like environmental effects or social effects, but those are the exceptions. And when companies choose to consider environmental and social effects besides profits, they have to be really explicit and have to kind of make it clear to their investors that that's what they're going to be doing, because that's an anomaly, and most profit-making companies just focus on maximizing profits. Now, there are other things that are important besides maximizing profits. And so if maximizing profits and accumulating your bank balance was the only objective, then I don't think anyone would donate food aid to countries and people in need. So humanitarian assistance is an example of the notion that there must be more to life than maximizing your own profits. Otherwise, there wouldn't be charitable donations, and there definitely are. Sometimes. In the United States, you don't get a tax write-off until the amount of your donations exceeds the standard deduction. And so most people who donate to charity in the United States aren't going to donate more than around $20,000. And so up until $0 to $20,000, when you donate to charity, you're not getting any tax benefit for it. But certainly for wealthy people, there can be a reduction in the profits, but I mean, you don't like donate $10 million and that reduces your tax bill by $20 million. The benefits aren't quite that juicy. All it does is it reduces the profits that you've got, and you usually are paying tax on your profits. So, it's not always strictly altruism. Some people will donate money so they can get their name on a building. Some people donate for, there's a wide variety of reasons, and I think the most important thing is that it can do good in the world. And another consideration that goes beyond humanitarian assistance, just as an example that there's more to life than money and there's more to decision-making processes than maximizing profit, is money that's spent on safety. And so this is a picture of a guardrail. And guardrails are expensive because of the materials. They're expensive because of the labor of installing it. But there must be some factor besides maximizing profit, because this road would have been cheaper to build without the guardrails. You could have still had traffic going over that road, and the road serves an economic purpose to connect industries and markets and to allow people to go to and from work. But it has more than an economic effect if people are getting injured or killed on a roadway. So spending on safety devices and injury prevention is an example of some way that profitability is constrained by other factors. Here's a picture, another picture of a highway. Does anybody know what this is? Yeah, it's a sound wall or a noise barrier. So on the other side of this road must be people who don't like the sound of the interstate highway. And I can certainly appreciate that. This time of year, when the leaves start to come off of the trees, I can hear Interstate 64 a lot more clearly than I can during the summer. I live about 1.5 miles from the interstate. And in the summer, I can't hear it at all. Just, I think the leaves maybe deflect the sound. But in the wintertime, I definitely hear it. And it's not bad, but I wish I didn't hear it. And so the wall that's here cost money to build. And the people who had it built, they're not paying necessarily, they're not thinking how many dollars per hour is their peace and quiet worth. But there was some sort of an evaluation that was done to decide whether the benefit of reducing the noise is worth the cost. Should this wall have been, instead of 20 feet tall, should it have been 30 feet tall or 50 feet tall? If it was taller and thicker, it would have reduced the noise even more. So there must have been some sort of a decision-making process that said what was the appropriate amount to spend for what kind of benefits. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Environmental protection is another issue that is important, that companies who pollute oftentimes don't have to pay the effect of the pollution. It's considered an externality, meaning that the people who benefit aren't always the same people who pay the price for the negative things that occur. So when a big corporation hires people at really low wages, and then those low-wage employees have to go to the government for health insurance or for food assistance, the company is benefiting from their labor, but it doesn't suffer the externalities of not paying a living wage. Those externalities are borne by the people themselves and society as a whole. So these are all just meant to illustrate different types of things that if you just went by the profit, you would throw your bottle in a river, because that's cheaper than paying Republic Services for trash collection every month. Think about what if that was your habit, was just loading up your truck or your vehicle, driving down to the dock on the Ohio River and just pouring everything out of your car and into the river, because you could save $24 a month if you just dumped your trash in the river instead of paying for it to be hauled away, crushed, buried, like it is at a sanitary landfill. So it's not always just about the money. That was definitely, that point was made in a big way when society basically shut down in 2020 for the COVID pandemic, and people, in retrospect, a lot of what we went through then seems like an overreaction now. That's too bad. I think a lot of people didn't know in the moment how serious the disease would be, but I guess we have to applaud society and decision makers for recognizing that there was at least, it was worth considering that human life has some value beyond just the economic effects of the pandemic. That like preserving life was a priority above and beyond the profitability in the short term. Okay, so we're going to be focusing in the next section of the course on public sector projects, which are undertaken by governments, and they're undertaken for the benefit of citizens. And these are different from private sector projects, both in terms of who owns them, but also why they are done. And so there may occasionally be certain things on this list that are owned by a private company, but a lot of times they're done by the public sector as well. So for example, hospitals. There are for-profit hospitals and there are also non-profit hospitals that are government owned. Some of the things on this list are almost exclusively public sector projects. Like it's very unusual for there to be nowadays a private waterway. You know, in olden times there were privately owned canals that would take barge traffic from place to place, but now the waterways are more or less exclusively owned and operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. There are private water companies. Here in West Virginia, we have our water being produced by West Virginia American Water at a very high premium, by the way. We have some of the highest water rates in the nation here, higher than Arizona, higher than New Mexico, higher than California. We've got some really expensive water in West Virginia. And it's not because there's a big shortage of it. You know, we're right next to the river. So, question? No, it's not because of pollution. My take on why we have such high water rates in West Virginia is, number one, because the infrastructure for distribution is in kind of poor repair. It's old and it's expensive. The customers are spread out. So they spend a lot of money maintaining the pipes. But then it's also because it's a private company and West Virginia has relatively weak regulators. So it's a big national company that has more expensive lawyers and deeper pockets. And so when they say they want to raise their rates, the people at the Public Service Commission are kind of outgunned. They can't keep up. So these are all done to generate benefits for people. And some of these wouldn't be done at all unless there was some public sector funding that would undertake it. Some of them can be done like highways. There may be toll roads that are done as a public-private partnership. But the main point of public sector projects is not necessarily to maximize profit, but maybe just to break even and then have something that generates value for the people of an area. So the purpose of public sector projects is to provide services to the citizenry for the public good and at no profit. So here's a table that kind of compares and contrasts what we've been studying so far, which is private sector projects, which are generally smaller, medium, large. The public sector doesn't get involved in small operations like operating a corner store. Usually the government gets involved when there's someone else who won't step in, either because the cost of initiating the project is so high. Like, look at this list. Bridges, highways, very expensive, with long-term payoffs when there is any kind of economic incentive. Airports cost billions of dollars to prepare and undertake an airport project. And so the public sector is able to do those big projects because they're able to borrow money at low rates. The public sector, like the U.S. government, the state of West Virginia, local governments, they have the ability to borrow money typically at lower interest rates than companies can borrow money, and then that enables them to look longer term because they don't have to pay off projects quite so quickly if they're financing the projects at lower interest rates. Why is it, do you suppose, that governments can borrow money at lower interest rates than companies? Does anybody remember when we've talked about interest rates what is the main factor that drives high interest rates? Risk. What's that?
Likelihood of default.
Likelihood of default. That's right. So default risk. And so governments are less likely to default on their obligations than private companies. And that's because private companies offer their goods and services on a voluntary basis. Like you don't have to buy an iPhone. You could buy an Android phone or, you know, Samsung, LG. You don't have to buy Ford. You could buy a Chevrolet. And so governments, on the other hand, it's not optional. You have to pay your taxes. They have a legal monopoly on the right to tax people, companies, and so they're considered a lower risk of default because they have that legal authority to impose taxes on people. So their revenue stream is more assured than a company's revenue stream is. And so that's why they can borrow money at lower rates. They can look longer term. One of the other big differences is that when it comes to private companies, the focus is on rate of return and economic analysis on the yes versus no. So think about the decision criteria that you've learned so far. It's always been if the sum of the present worth is greater than or equal to 0 when amounts are discounted at the MAR. It's been if the internal rate of return is greater than the MAR, then the project is potentially acceptable. So those decision criteria have been economically oriented, whereas decision criteria in public service projects aren't necessarily about profitability. They're about generating value to the public. So think about Ritter Park here in Huntington. Has anybody here been to Ritter Park before? A lot of people. If you haven't, you should go check it out. It's very nice. It's probably a better park than Huntington deserves, honestly. It's beautiful.
Fair assessment.
Yeah. I mean, the same could be said of Central Park in New York City, though, right? That's a better park than New York City deserves. But think about a park anywhere. You don't pay admission to go to the park. Not in the United States. I've paid admission to go to parks. I mean, some like state parks or national parks, you pay some nominal fee to get in, a couple of bucks. But the fact is that parks aren't done with profits in mind. Nobody was thinking like how much revenue they could capture from children playing on a swing set. It was done just to have something nice, a nice place for people to go. So it's not a selection criteria that's based on rate of return. And in the same way, the decision making includes lots of different stakeholders. And so here it says politically inclined because politics is the process of weighing the benefits and interests of different stakeholders. So in politics, you're trying to weigh the needs of companies with the needs of communities, the needs of the individual. So it's just making trade-offs. And so the process of deciding what public sector projects are going to look like, where they go, what they're going to do, that's typically a political process. Now, one thing to note, just because the public is able to borrow money at low interest rates, and just because the public is able to get revenue from taxes, doesn't mean that that's free money. It may be that the government has a lower risk of default, but we always need to keep in mind that for a public sector project to be undertaken, that money had to come from somewhere. And when you fund one thing, those same dollars can't be used for something else. So on this list, if you build a hospital in a certain town, the money that was spent on that hospital, that same money can't be used to improve the sewer network. Same thing is true about a university. If a university decides to build a new cybersecurity building for $45 million, those $45 million can't be used for other things. You know, maybe you're doing a good thing with building the new building. Maybe you're doing a good thing when you decide to build a hospital, but you have to be very careful that you're considering all of the different ways that money could be spent, and you're spending it on those projects that are most deserving. Because that money that you've taken from other people, they could have spent on things that are more important to them than public sector projects. All right. One of the interesting things about public sector projects is that we have to try and develop a dollar estimate for some things that we wouldn't normally associate in economic terms. So this is a picture of a traffic jam. And we don't have too bad of traffic jams in Huntington. It's one of the things I really like about living here is like a bad traffic jam will take me like 10 minutes to get out of. I used to live in Dubai, and a bad traffic jam there, like 4 or 5 hours. Like you'd really have to keep calm when you're stuck in traffic in big cities because it can just be super aggravating. And sometimes you're in a situation where you have to think, what would it be worth to get out of this traffic jam right now? How much would I pay to not sit here for an hour? So how much would you pay not to sit in traffic for an hour? What's that worth to you?
What am I doing with the time?
You're sitting in traffic.
Everything you do has a direct value to it, is what I have.
I guess maybe what you should be thinking is what else would I be doing if I wasn't sitting in traffic? Like if you're supposed to be at your kid's recital, and this is the one and only time you could go watch them do that, you'd probably pay a lot. But if you're just maybe getting groceries and then you've got nothing planned after that, maybe it's easy to just sit in the traffic and not worry so much, and maybe you wouldn't pay as much. Sometimes when I visit my brother, he lives in Miami, they have highways down there and there's HOV lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes. And above the lane, it says how much it costs to go on that toll road. And it changes from time to time. Sometimes it's only 50 cents to drive on the toll road. Sometimes it's $5 to drive on the toll road. And it changes based on how crowded the traffic is. So the weird thing that we have to do in benefit cost analysis is we have to, well, somebody has to do an analysis that looks at the economic value of all of these types of projects. So a highway isn't generating revenue for the state of West Virginia, except for like a very small section of toll road between like Beckley and Charleston. There is a toll road.
Wouldn't it generate revenue through increasing commerce?
Indirectly it does, yes, but not directly. And the state doesn't get most of the revenue of that commerce. You'd say that the benefit mostly goes to trucking companies and the companies that are doing the commerce. So, I mean, it benefits them indirectly because when you've got a healthy tax base, you're going to have more revenue coming in. But the way that we're going to analyze projects is we're going to look at like the highway. If you added a lane and it reduces congestion, that reduced congestion, we're going to say has some economic value. So we're going to try and put dollar values on benefits, and also we're going to try and put dollar values on disbenefits. Like if construction makes it really dusty and people have allergic reactions to that or get sick, then how much is the cost of that lost productivity due to ill health? We're going to be trying to put dollar values on recreational opportunities like fishing. You know, in order to justify building a reservoir somewhere or putting in a boat launch. They're not going to be looking necessarily just at the fees that are generated by the boat launch, but they're also going to be looking at, like, is there some way to economically express the value of the recreational opportunities, even though the people aren't paying for the recreational opportunities? Or maybe, you know, like when you go fishing, you have to have a license. But you don't have to pay per fish that you've caught, and you don't have to pay per hour that you're standing there. But you're getting some benefit and some enjoyment and recreation for doing that. You know, like in my case, I run on a trail near my house almost every morning. How much would I pay to run that? I'd probably pay $10 a day to run on that trail, but I don't pay anything. But like that's about how much enjoyment I get out of my morning run is $10 worth of enjoyment. Now, it'll be economists who do this analysis and try and assign economic value, but benefits and disbenefits, we're going to be asking questions like when there's a construction project and it causes delay during just the construction phase, how much is that disbenefit? And we're going to work that into our calculations of comparing the benefits and costs of a project. And in the end, we're going to have a pretty easy decision criteria. What we're going to say is if the benefits outweigh the costs, then a project is justifiable. That's pretty common sense, right? If the benefits outweigh the costs, then the project is justifiable. And if the costs outweigh the benefits, probably we shouldn't do the project. So we'll be monetizing a bunch of different effects. And by monetizing here, I mean is we're going to be assigning dollar values to things that are either benefits, disbenefits, or costs. And the costs are usually direct, and they're easy to quantify. But the benefits and disbenefits are a little bit more tricky to put a dollar value on. So here are the definitions of each of those terms as we're going to use it in B2C analysis. And here, where it says B/C, that is kind of intentional because we're going to calculate a ratio. We're going to have the benefits in the numerator, the costs in the denominator, and we'll calculate a ratio. Anybody want to guess what ratio is the dividing line between a good project and a bad project?
If it's not less than 1.
1 is the dividing line. 1 would mean the benefits and the costs are equal. So when the ratio is greater than 1, that tells you that you've got more advantages to the public. So the advantages could be time savings, improved reliability, enhanced safety, environmental protection, leisure, increased business revenue. Those are all benefits. Disbenefits are the bad things like the side effects that arise. And the disadvantages are the ones that are borne by the public. You'll notice that that's underlined. By benefits, we're not talking about how much money does the contractor get for building the thing. That's not a benefit. Because the benefit that we're interested in is from the perspective of the public. So disbenefits are things like delay during construction or delay due to changes. You know, like the changes that they're doing to Hal Greer, I'm still not exactly sure why they're doing it, but I think maybe it's to make it more visually appealing because they're going to be putting like planted grass areas. They'll probably put flowers in. It'll look nice, but you may end up having a little bit longer commute time from here to the interstate. It may induce delay. So there's disbenefits of that project for sure.
See, I was just gonna say just exactly that. They're making it just so it looks pretty, and that's.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you bring tourists to the.
But
And it could also improve safety. Like if cars are driving more slowly, there's going to be the accidents that occur will be less dangerous. So
I feel like people are just going to be driving fast around the hospital anyway if they need to drive fast.
yeah, could be. Yeah.
yeah, it's
I want to handle my car with it.
Now, the costs are the expenditures by the government to undertake the project, and typically those have two categories. The initial costs, which would be a lump sum at times 0, and then annual maintenance and operation costs. So now, here is something to keep in mind, that for us to calculate the ratio, B to C, if the benefits are in the future, but all of the costs are in the present, you couldn't calculate a meaningful ratio until you put all of those dollars in the same time. Remember, and that's been the case in a lot of the analyses that we've done. To combine dollars together, they have to be in the same time frame of reference. And so you could convert all of the money in the project to the present, or you could convert all of the money in the project to an annual basis or to a future basis. But to calculate the ratio of B to C, all of the money needs to be in the present, annual basis, or future. It all needs to be at the same time. The other thing to keep in mind is down here in the denominator of the ratio, costs, you don't need to put a minus sign for the costs because we already know that they're costs. And so ordinarily when you're doing like present worth analysis, costs are assigned a negative value because they're outflows, but here we already know that. And finally, when a project is undertaken that somehow reduces spending by the government, then you'd subtract that from costs. So if they upgraded a power plant because they wanted to make it more efficient, and then they had to spend less money on the fuel, then those savings would be subtracted from the costs of undertaking the project. All right, so here is the ratio. In the numerator, you have the benefits minus the disbenefits. And in the denominator, you have the initial costs and the maintenance and operation costs. And remember that the maintenance and operation costs are typically annual, and so you'd need to put them in terms of a present worth to combine it with the initial costs. Same thing with the benefits and disbenefits. The most common thing is just to move everything into present terms and then calculate the ratio that way. And the decision criteria is if the B to C ratio is greater than or equal to 1, then you can accept the project, otherwise it should be rejected. This is a conventional B to C ratio. Sometimes you'll be asked to calculate a modified B to C ratio, and in that case, the cost of maintenance and operation is moved up into the numerator. Okay, so let me hand out this in-class exercise. This is mostly some practice with calculating time value of money. But once you do that and calculate the present worth of all of these things, then calculate the B to C ratio. I suggest as a starting point that you create a cash flow diagram, but if you don't feel like you need to, then you can skip that step. But remember, the cash flow diagram is useful when you're not exactly sure where the money is and how to convert it from reference to reference. The main things we want to do here is calculate the present worth of the initial costs. Now, the initial costs here are the construction costs. So find the present worth of the construction costs. Find the present worth of maintenance. Calculate the present worth of the benefits. So here the benefits are this, what's described as revenue and benefits. And then calculate the present worth of the disbenefits. So those are the 4 categories that you need to calculate in terms of what's at the present. On the back side of the paper is the 4% factor table. So this is a 20-year lifespan overall. For example, the maintenance will occur $1 million at the end of each year for 20 years. All right, so feel free to collaborate on this one. It certainly doesn't need to be quiet as you're working on this if you want to check amounts with people. If you ever plan to take the FE exam, you're almost certainly going to get questions where you have to use these factor tables. You know, there is an engineering economics section on the FE exam, and so time value of money is never going to go away. It's not just that I love it that I keep bringing it up. I bring it up because it's important and it is a part of B2C analysis. So on the whiteboard, and now it's recorded into the video, are the calculations for how you calculate the initial costs, meaning typically the construction cost to initiate the project, the present value of the maintenance and operation, the present value of all of those future benefits discounted to time 0, the future amount of all the disbenefits discounted to the present. And if we calculate the conventional B to C ratio, it's below 1. So that means this project isn't justified. The costs are simply too high compared to the benefits that are going to be generated. So the ratio is 0.414 for the conventional B to C, which is thumbs down. And then when we look at it from the modified B to C ratio, the ratio is even lower. 0.305 is the modified B to C. So this project is thumbs down. We should not undertake it. Okay, I know that's a lot of calculations. Wish we had more time, but we don't. We're out of time. Just remember that homework 8 is due on Monday. This has some B to C questions on that assignment, so if you want to look it over while it's fresh in your mind, that'd probably be a good idea. See you on Friday.